Historical Christianity and Other Worldviews. We are in our 8th session. We are on page 44 of the syllabus. And I want to tell about a story that happened shortly after World War II. A general and his young lieutenant boarded a train in England. The only seats left were across from a beautiful young lady and her grandmother. The general and the lieutenant sat facing the women. As the train pulled out, it went through a long tunnel. For about 10 seconds, there was total darkness. In the silence of the moment, those on the train heard two things: a kiss and a slap. Everyone on the train had his or her own perception of what had happened. The young lady thought to herself, "Well, I'm flattered that the lieutenant kissed me, but I'm terribly embarrassed that grandmother hit him." The grandmother thought, "I'm aggravated that the young man kissed my granddaughter, but I'm proud that she had the courage to retaliate." The general sat there thinking to himself, "My lieutenant showed a lot of spunk kissing that girl, but why did she slap me by mistake?" The lieutenant was the only one on the train who really knew what happened. You see, in the brief moment of darkness, he had the opportunity to kiss a pretty girl and to slap his general. Well, most of us really don't really wonder about other people, whether they're being disguised as something that they aren't, like a CIA agent or an FBI agent or something like that. We don't go through life thinking that people are what they don't seem to be. Yet some people's life is a cloak of disguise for a life which they think secret knowledge will save them. People sometimes would not even choose this life freely, but they get tricked into it. And we see at the top of page 44, as we start into our lesson on Freemasonry, a passage from a book character called Jeff Moore. And this is actually the type of thing that happens to people as they go to the first meeting of the lodge and they are initiated into Freemasonry. And I just read this to you, quote, "I do not want to go into all the details of what transpired at that time, except to say that they had me remove my suit coat, my shoes and socks, and my tie. I was then told to take off my trousers and slip my left arm out of my shirt so that my arm and breast were bare. They gave me a pair of baggy pants to wear, that one leg cut off at the knee, and then blindfolded me and put a noose around my neck. I guess that while I was expecting it to be a bit fraternity-like in nature, I never prepared myself to be in such a state. I became quite upset when they required that I remove my wedding ring from my finger. You know, I wanted to stop it all right then, because that ring was the symbol of my love and my fidelity to my wife Jennifer. But I let it go rather than make a scene, and I allowed myself to fall one step deeper into deception. Then there was the knock on the door. The person asked who was there, and a man with me said that I was a poor, blind candidate who had long been in darkness and was seeking the light of that worshipful lodge." End quote. Now, what is Freemasonry? Well, it is the world's largest secret organization. Write secret there in the blank. There are approximately 6 million Freemasons in the world, and 4 million of them are right here in the United States. Under B, Freemasonry cloaks itself in good works, but inside it is perverting into a paganistic religion. Many good people, including Christians, join the Masons thinking it is like a fraternity. If they don't advance very far into it, they won't realize that the inner circles are simply using them to propel its New Age occultic agenda. In a little book called Masons, Harold Berry tells us, quote, "While researching the beliefs of the Masons, I came into contact with an Air Force officer who had been a fourth-generation Mason. By age 23, he was a 32nd-degree Scottish Rite Prince of the Royal Secret, a York Rite Knight Templar, the senior deacon of a Blue Lodge that he attended, and unofficial Tyler of another lodge he frequently attended. He had been to lodges in New Hampshire, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Maine, Nebraska, even Japan and the Philippines. He not only attended, but was active in most of these lodges. Of his own free will and accord, he came to see that Jesus Christ was the true light and chief cornerstone that the builders rejected. 1 Peter 2, 6 and 7. Let's turn over to 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 6 and 7, and see what he discovered. In 1 Peter 2, verse 6, 7 and 8, therefore it is also contained in the Scripture, behold, I lay in Zion a chief cornerstone, elect, precious, and he who believes on him will by no means be put to shame. Therefore to you who believe he is precious, but to those who are disobedient, the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone, and a stone of stumbling, and a rock of offense. They stumble, being disobedient to the word to which they were also appointed. Now, what he discovered was that Jesus Christ is the chief cornerstone. Well, what has happened in Freemasonry today is that they have selectively taken out the name of Jesus Christ out of most, if not all, of their rituals and rites, even scripture passages that they have lifted from the Bible that would have Jesus Christ in them. They have taken that out and simply replaced it with the word God. But this man discovered that Jesus Christ was the light, and it took him out of Freemasonry and into Christianity. I have a man in the church where I serve, or I pastor, who was a 32nd degree Mason. And I've met others before that have come out of Freemasonry into the light of Jesus Christ. And it is their testimony and concern about Freemasonry that people come to the lodge, and a part of their ritual is that they are seeking the light of Freemasonry. But to those who have been saved out of Freemasonry and into Christianity, they say, now wait a minute, it's not the light of Freemasonry that saves us, it's the light of Jesus Christ that changes our lives and saves us. And that people that go to the lodge that are Christians thinking that there is light in there other than in Christianity are being deceived. Now, page 45, why is Freemasonry being considered in a study on the cults? Because it uses deception to get men involved and entraps them by secret ritual rites and secret blood oaths. Under B, because it opposes the Christian faith by, number 1, teaching a salvation based upon works through the lodge. Number 2, purposely removing the name of Jesus Christ from its scripture quotations. Number 3, blaspheming the true name of God. And number 4, reducing the Holy Scriptures to nothing but symbolism. That's it in a nutshell. That's why it opposes the Christian faith. Under C, because it worships and gives honor to Jabulon. That's capital Jabulon, Jabulon. In the next blank, Abaddon, capital Abbadon, Abaddon, and Baphomet, capital Baphomet, Baphomet, in the upper degrees of Freemasonry. Now, just to give you some understanding, this is what Baphomet looks like, the god Baphomet. You can see this image of Baphomet, the horned god, which is frequently used in satanic rituals. Just notice the head, the goat of Mendes, the pentagram in the forehead, the horns coming out, other occultic symbolism, the half moons, the fingers in secret symbolism, all of the different things of Baphomet tie into Freemasonry. The wings, the angel, the angelic fallen being, and those types of things. This is the image of Baphomet that the Freemasons actually revere as one of their gods. Under D, once again, why is Freemasonry being considered? Because its own writers teach paganism, spiritism, and the occult. Paganism, spiritism, and the occult. In his book, The Truth About Masons, which is an excellent book, by the way, Robert Morey states this, quote, hundreds of Masonic books which attack Christianity and openly teach paganism are published, supported and recommended by high officials, state lodges, and supreme councils. We are told that this is proper because the lodge should be universal in appeal, and each Mason can interpret the word God and the symbols of the craft any way he wants. But when a Christian Mason attempts to give a Christian interpretation of the rituals and symbols of the craft, he is forbidden to do so. That this is true can be seen if we ask when was the last time that a Christian interpretation of the craft was published, supported, and recommended by high officials, state lodges, and supreme councils. We have seen hundreds of Hindu, Buddhist, Gnostic, Druid, occultic, New Age, Hermetic interpretations of the craft, but not one Christian interpretation. If Masonry is truly universal and open to all religions, then why is it closed to Christianity? End quote. Now, what attracts men to Freemasonry? Well, there are really many things. One of them can be business associates. They know people that are in the lodge. Sometimes men like to simply do things with men. It's kind of like a fraternity atmosphere, and so they get drawn into Freemasonry because they like the fraternal nature of it. Sometimes it has to do with power or things like that. There are Masons. I heard a report of one Mason who was in one lodge meeting, and in that lodge meeting there was a colonel in the armed forces in one corner. In another corner there was a judge, and in another corner there was a government official. And these were people with clout, secretly tied together, knowing one another in a secret order of men. And you can see some of the other things that draw people or men into Freemasonry. And remember, most of them up front have no idea of what they're being drawn into. On page 45, what is a brief historical outline of American Freemasonry? Well, let me back up here just a little bit. There's a lot of ancient myth about where Freemasonry originated, where it came to pass, and if you talk to some Freemasons, they'll say one thing. You talk to others, they'll say another thing. But somewhere back in the 1500s or so, the concept of Freemasonry really came into being as a secret organization, and it started out with the idea of operative Freemasons. And those were people that literally were Masons. And they put together the bricks and the stones, and they created buildings, and they wanted to create for themselves a security against people who would take advantage of them, that would hire them and not pay them the wages and things of that nature. So they created kind of a secret organization among themselves with secret signs and being a part of these rituals and things. Well, eventually some rich people got wind of what was happening with this secret organization, and these were people of influence, and they thought, hey, we can use some of these concepts to promote our own agenda. And these were called speculative Freemasons. And they weren't really Masons at all, but they started attending the meetings and becoming a part of it. Well, we pick it up there in the middle of page 46, and we see that by 1730s that Masonic lodges were established. They were actually around before that, but inside of the Americas in the 1730s they were established at that time, and there were clubs, mostly upper class, and they had some Christian influence. There was the Revolutionary period, and the Masons gained some secret political, economic, and social clout. In the post-Revolution period, the movement kind of shifted from the upper class in the United States to the middle class. Now, in other European countries, it still remained in the upper class echelon, but in the United States, it had kind of moved to the middle class. And then you see in 1826, William Morgan was murdered. Just highlight there. William Morgan was murdered for exposing Masonic secrets in his book. He got ticked off because he didn't get a contract to build a Masonic lodge. And being a Mason, he thought that he had a right to get that contract. So he decided that he would expose their secrets. And he was actually apprehended, taken away from a prison, and he was murdered. Well, because of that, and because it was exposed about his murder, there rose up what was called the anti-Masonic political party. And the amazing thing about this is that it actually ended up being the third largest political party in our country's history. Most powerful, especially at that time in the 1800s. There were a lot of people that were opposed to the concept of Freemasonry because they saw that people of influence were involved in it, and that it had some European connections, and they weren't quite sure what was going on with it. And so they really came out to oppose Masonry, and it almost wiped it out of this country. But eventually, people kind of forgot about it over about 20 years, and it started to rise up again. And then in the 1860s and 70s, along comes Albert Pike, who rewrote the Scottish Rite decrees, and he tried to de-Christianize Freemasonry. He tried to drive out the Christians that were involved in it. And I have his book, Morals and Dogma, and basically he goes through all of the different Scottish rites, and he really adds the entire occultic flavor to the whole thing. And tried to, he would take things like the cross, which at one time stood for Christianity, and he changed the symbolism of it to the point where it no longer stood for the cross of Christ, but it stood for simply mankind. And he would take things like the communion cup and de-Christianize them and all of these different rituals, so that as men got deeper and deeper into Freemasonry, all of a sudden it wasn't about God anymore at all, but it was about a false god. And then in the 1920s, this is just a thumbnail sketch of the history of Freemasonry, but in the 1920s there was an increase in Christian membership. A lot of the Southern Baptists got involved in Freemasonry at this time, and other Christian denominations as well, and they tried to reclaim Freemasonry and get it back to some more of its Christian roots. Now, as the 20th century during the 20th century, there was a great inner struggle between Christian, pagan, and occultic influences. And today, there are Christians that are still in Freemasonry. And my challenge to them is either to change Freemasonry from within or to get out of the thing. Because as we're going to see in this time, there are some things about it that are just not right. At the bottom of page 46, what influence did Freemasonry have in early America? Now, it absolutely amazes people at times, and it did me when I started studying this years ago, that some of our early forefathers were Freemasons. For instance, I have a list there, and I know that there were more than these, but at the very bottom of the page, notice George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, Paul Revere, John Hancock. As a matter of fact, even Benedict Arnold was a Freemason. And that was one of the biggest things, is that he turned traitor not only to the people of this country, but to the Freemasons of this country. And so they were out to get him. Now, it should be said about George Washington, because I know that concerns people sometimes, was George Washington a Mason? Well, yes, he was. We have to remember that Freemasonry was not back then what it has become today, for one thing. There were a lot of people involved in Freemasonry back then, a lot of influential Christians. But it should also be noted that it's only accounted one time that George Washington actually went to a Freemason lodge meeting. And even though the Freemasons have claimed him as their own and have even built monuments to him and even have a lodge named after him, the fact is that his membership is very questionable. But what is some of the influence of Freemasonry on the United States of America? Well, you really don't have to look very far to see some of that influence. For instance, if you go to Washington, D.C., you see the Washington Monument, which is an obelisk. Well, it's kind of interesting here because this thing is 555 feet tall, 55 feet wide at the base. When this thing was built in the mid-1800s, it caused a great controversy. As a matter of fact, it had to close down for a while. Why? Well, what is an obelisk? An obelisk is the symbol of a pagan Egyptian deity. And it's worshiping a pagan idol is what it is. And so there was great controversy over this whole thing. And it even brought it to a close for a while, but eventually people kind of forgot what it was all about, and it got pushed through. Another example of the influence of Freemasonry is if you take a simple map of Washington, D.C., you will actually see the symbols of Freemasonry are built right into the structures of Washington, D.C. For instance, you can see at the top of this the White House, then the Lincoln Memorial, there's the Washington Monument in the center, the Jefferson Memorial, and over here is the United States Capitol. All of these buildings were built by the Freemasons. All of them have cornerstones in them saying dedicated to the United States by the Freemasons, or something of that wording. They were built by the Freemasons. The entire streets are laid out with the symbol of Freemasonry in mind, which we will see here in a few moments. But just to give you some concept of that, you can read the account of it on page 47. This comes from Ed Decker's What You Need to Know About Masons. The entire concept. I've been to D.C. and have seen this with my own eyes. Now on page 48, what is the Blue Lodge? A, it is the local meeting place of the Masons. They call it a temple. There are currently 33,700 lodges in 164 countries, with 15,300 of them in the United States. Each state has a grand lodge that presides over the state and is autonomous. So in the United States alone, there's 15,300 lodges. Under B, the head of the Blue Lodge is the worshipful master. He has the responsibility of running business and initiation of the meetings. I live right next door to the worshipful master in our city. And when he moved in there, he had no idea that I was doing my dissertation on him. And I simply took some time to get to know him. He's a really nice guy. But I saw the symbolism on his vehicles, and one time he hinted at me coming to one of his lodge meetings, but you actually have to ask. They won't just come out and invite you for the most part. You have to ask to say, well, what's this all about? And I've been asked that a couple times in my life, but I didn't give in to it. I knew it was happening, and I simply was praying for him. And the Lord actually gave me an opportunity to witness into his life at one time for about 45 minutes about Jesus, and he actually has one of my books. So he knows where I stand on the whole subject. But each Blue Lodge has a worshipful master, and they have these different 3 degrees: entered apprentice, fellow craft, and then master mason. They have various blood oaths that they have to take in order to follow these. As a matter of fact, if you look on page 243 of the textbook, you can find some of these blood oaths that I've included in Gate Breakers. The entered apprentice, this is simply a small part of his oath. He has to say, having my throat cut across, my tongue torn out from its roots, and my body buried in the rough sands of the sea. The master mason has to say, quote, my body severed in two, my bowels taken from thence and burned to ashes, end quote. So these are some of the things that they have to say. What are the options for advancement? Well, from the Blue Lodge, you can actually, after you go through these three, entered apprentice through Master Mason, one can actually go into the Scottish Rite or the York Rite. The Scottish Rite has 32 degrees, and they end up at the Shriners, the ancient and Arabic order of nobles of Mystic Shrine. The other route a person can go is through the York Rite, through 13 degrees, and they end up at what's called the Knights Templar. Knights Templars. Some of the symbols of Freemasonry. Now you can see in this symbol here, notice the center of this thing, the compass, and then the square, thank you. And in the center is the G, which stands for the generating principle. Now for them, the square is the morality, the receptive female. The compass is the spirituality or the generating male. And the G is the Masonic God, which is the generating principle of man. Some say it means geometry, but most say it means the generating principle. And when you consider the pattern of the streets of D.C., you can see that right there in the center is this generating principle. And that is the Washington Monument coming up. Does everybody see that? And then you have, the parts of the compass and the square outlined in the streets there. So that's a part of that whole thing. Let's turn over to page 49. You can read through these various things there at the top of page 49, what the three candles represent, the sun, moon, and the Masonic worshipful master. We talked about G, God or geometry, the all-seeing eye. We see that on dollar bills. The cable tow, the rope around the neck. The white apron, which is the influence, purity, honor. As a matter of fact, when they put the blindfold, which we'll look at in a moment, around a person's eyes, they call that hoodwinked. And hoodwinked is actually another term for being deceived and entering into that deception. What I want to do now is to actually take you through some of the examples of the rituals of the Blue Lodge. And I have these on overhead. And this basically is the Blue Lodge setting for the entered apprentice. And basically what we see here is that the entered apprentice comes in through this door down here to the light of Freemasonry. This is the door that is knocked on. Comes in and does a ritualistic walk. There's the candles in the middle, the Bible that is placed out, open face. These are different people in positions of authority in the lodge. The entered apprentice comes in, goes around, the initiate goes around here and comes up to the grand worshipful master. Now, understand that the entered apprentice has no idea that this is going to take place in his life. He has simply come to a meeting. And as I understand it, before this time, he's actually voted on by the people that are in the lodge as to whether they believe he is somebody who can be trusted or not. And you know the old expression, blackballed? Well, they have white balls and black balls, and if somebody puts a black ball in there, then this individual is blackballed from the meeting, and he will not actually go through this initiation process. But if he receives all white, if it's all A-OK, Then he enters in and he looks. Well, first of all, I'll say that he comes before here's the grand worshipful master, the most worshipful master in the east, this says. And you see on the bottom the table, the Bible with the square and the compass on it, the three lights surrounding it. And this is what the entered apprentice looks like as he comes in. And there's the different things, the blindfold, the noose around the neck, the bare left breast, the left leg, and all of these different things. One shoe off, one shoe on. And he's being led around, and then finally coming before the grand worshipful master. Now notice that he has his hand upon the square and the compass and on the Bible. And he has already been approached and had something jabbed like a point into his breast. And he has been told that if he explains any of the things that happen behind these closed doors, that his life is forfeit. And all of a sudden, he lays his hand on the Bible, and he takes a blood oath on the Bible that he will never express the things that happened behind those closed doors. Well, have the Freemasons been successful in keeping their information? Well, to a certain point they are, because most places I go, nobody even knows what goes on behind the lodge doors in the communities, in the over 15,000 lodges that are in this country. Of course, time and time again they've been exposed, but then one generation comes and forgets, and it happens all over again. But today, a lot of people kind of know what's happening there. These are some of the secret signs that they have inside of the lodge. These are just different various secret actions. Notice this one in the bottom. This is the one that I talked about with Joseph Smith, that he put his hands up in the air and said, "Is there no one here to save this poor widow's son?" Secret handshake. I had a guy come into our church one time, and he gave me the secret Masonic handshake. Somebody was introducing him to me. And I knew what it was. And it was kind of funny because I just kind of looked at him, I was a little bit shocked, and I was trying to figure out how to respond. And so I said something like, well, we're really glad to have you here. He's really this tall guy. Really glad to have you here. And, you'll probably really like the church, because I just got to tell you, we don't have any secrets around here. Never saw the guy again. Well, in the third Master Mason ritual, they have the story of Hiram Abiff. And this is the legend of Hiram Abiff, in that back at the time of Solomon's temple, Hiram Abiff was the only one who knew the name of God. And when Hiram Abiff would not reveal his secrets, he was killed. And with him died the true name of God. And you can see him laying here. But then down here, actually in the very end, he is given this says the real grip of a Master Mason. Actually, it's called the lion's grip. And it's actually kind of a satanic occultic ritual where they will grab somebody and resurrect them to life, so to speak. And that's what happens in the end. He's kind of raised up. And then later on they learn what the true name of God is, which we will get to. But these are some of the instruments. This is the Master Mason apron up here and the trowel. And I have brought with me some examples. This is the actual trowel that is used, and you can look at this during the break if you want to. It's got the symbol of Freemasonry on here, and it's about masonry, so it's a trowel. They will have the individuals wear these garments Now this is the white apron of the entered apprentice. Notice it's just pure white. This is basically their salvation, in a sense, this pure white. They are supposed to wear this at the time of death and have it around them and have it tied around them. And then when they get to the level of being a master mason, you can see the all-seeing eye on here and the other symbolism down at the bottom. This is a little nicer thing. This is their garment that they want to be buried with. And once again, it's kind of a works type of thing, moving up through the chain and understanding these things. Now, when they get to the royal arch ritual, this is the place where they discover what the name of God really is. And just kind of reading this, in this position, each one of these three repeats the following. As we three did agree in peace, love, and unity, the sacred word to keep, so we three do agree in peace, love, and unity, the sacred word to search, until we three, or three such as we, shall agree to close this royal arch. And then they stand there and they alternate by saying the words Jabulon, Jabulon, Jabulon. Each one takes a part of that and says Jabulon. Well, Jabulon is the name of, you find this on page 50, Jabulon is a perversion of the name of God. It is basic blasphemy because the Jah, or the J-A-O, stands for Yah or Jehovah, the God of Israel, whereas the bull, the Baal or Bel, stands for the God of Canaan, and the On, or Osiris, is the Egyptian sun god. It's the god of Egypt. And so they have perverted the name of God and made it Jabulon. You can also see one of their other gods is Abaddon. Now I'd like you to turn over to Revelation chapter 9 real quickly and look at this god that is one of their gods. Revelation 9, verse 11, and in the 17th degree of the Scottish Rite, the candidate is taught that this is the sacred name to be honored. But this is the king over the demons in the pit of hell, as Revelation 9:11 tells us. And they had as king over them the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, but in Greek he has the name Apollyon. And so this is one of the gods that they are taught to honor. Then there's the Hindu Trinity. Albert Pike substituted a triangle for the cross and said that it referred to Shiva, Krishna, and Brahma. Now, it's interesting. Some would include in here Vishnu. They would move out one of these other ones and they would probably say Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma. But it's kind of interesting. I remember years ago, back when I was messed up and searching for the truth, my dad was a Freemason. And he had on one of these rings, I remember, and he had the triangle on it. And he was trying to talk me into going to the lodge meeting because he thought that that might help me out. Now, he wasn't a faithful Mason, and he hadn't hardly ever been to it, but he thought, wow, if I was searching for truth, maybe that's what I needed. But I'm really glad that I didn't go to the lodge meeting because I was already messed up enough without getting involved in that. And since then, my dad and my mom and my family has really given their life to the Lord, by the way. Part of it is a result of what they've seen happen in my life over the years. And but some of the other gods that the Freemasons honor are Allah. The Shriners take an oath to Allah, the god of the Arabs and the Muslims. And then Baphomet that we already talked about. I just want to point out once again the concept of the oaths, that each degree has a blood oath with it. One example can be found in Duncan's ritual of Freemasonry. And I just read to you from page 96 of this, just a small portion of one of the blood oaths that is taken. Quote, "All this I most solemnly, sincerely promise and swear with a firm and steady resolution to perform the same without any hesitation, mental reservation, or secret evasion of mind, whatever, binding myself under no less penalty than that of having my body severed in two, my bowels taken from thence and burned to ashes, the ashes scattered before the four winds of heaven, that no more remembrance might be had of so vile a wicked a wretch as I." And so that's pretty heavy duty. It goes on from there, but that's pretty heavy duty type of oath to be taking. At the bottom of page 50, who are the Shriners and how do they fit into all of this? Notice under A that I say the Shriners do good works. Fact is, the Shriners do good works, and the Masons do good works. And we have to be careful about throwing stones at them or anybody else that does good works. And we have to be careful also about lumping people together in one group. We say, sometimes, I think as Christians or individuals, we see somebody as a Freemason, we label them in a certain way in our mind. Same with Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons or some other group. And we stereotype them all. But we aren't dealing with groups, we're dealing with individuals when it comes to where they're at with God. And we need to keep that in mind when we go witnessing to Masons or Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses or whoever. And are there Christians in some of these things? Well, as I've said before, sure there can be. I mean, Baptists can get involved in Freemasonry, into Jehovah's Witness. They can get taken into Mormonism. In Mormonism, you don't even learn about some of the doctrines until 6 months after you're into the thing. So people can be in these things, and they can even be spouting Christian doctrine and things like that. But there is some deception that has happened there in their minds. And we're talking about issues of heresy rather than mostly issues of salvation at times. Although I think it's limited how much these people really know about Christ that are involved in these different things. And we really want to bring them the truth of the light of Jesus Christ and precipitate them coming out of any kind of darkness at all and into the truth of Jesus. But the Shriners and the Masons do good works. But if you ever notice, I should say they have hospitals for children, they do the circuses, they do parades, and they raise money for certain things. But if you ever notice the little red fez hats that they wear, and on there they have the crescent moon and the scimitar and the star. Well, Fez was a city in the 8th century A.D., and at that city, 50,000 Christians were martyred by Islamic marauders who came through, and then the Muslims took off their white fezzes and they dipped it in the blood of the Christians, and that's where the whole concept of the red fez comes from today. And understand something, even though Shriners, which are the elite of the elite, you have to actually be voted into being a shrine. You have to go all the way through one of either the Scottish Rite or the other one. And once you get up to the top of it, take that back. You have to go through the 32 degrees of the Scottish Rite. And once you get up to the top of it, then you can actually be voted into being into being a shrine, an honorary member of the shrine, and that's called the 33rd degree. And I've met some that have come out of Freemasonry and were at that level. But they have to take a 4.5-page blood oath to Allah in order to get into being a shrine. And so, that's pretty hard when somebody has to do that. Now, what are some of the ways of witnessing to them? Well, if the Mason is a Christian, then just explaining to him the deception of Freemasonry can help. Thousands of Christians have left the organization in the last few years as the pagan agenda of the inner circles has been exposed. Under B, if the Mason is not a Christian, then consider doing some of the following. 1, share the gospel, your testimony, and your church with him. Under 2, regarding the blood oaths, share 1 John 1:9 and Leviticus 5, 4 through 6 and 10 with him about getting rid of these oaths and the fact that it's the blood of Jesus Christ that cleanses us from all sin. Under 3, get him a good book or cassette about the problems of Masonry. And number 4, look in the resource guide in the back of this book and send for Saints Alive in Jesus newsletter. I've got that information in the resource guide. Ed Decker is an expert, as well as some others, on the subject of Freemasonry. Also, you can email me at my website. I just want to give you my website number for any questions that you have at all. It's gatebreakers.com. You can go to my website, ask me any questions. If I don't know the answers, I will look them up for you and get back to you on that if it's at all possible. That's gatebreakers.com, and you can visit my website there and then actually email me or whatever. Now, I want to take a few moments here at the end of this time. How much more time do I have here? What are we looking at? Okay, just a few minutes. I just want to spend the last couple minutes, and I want to talk about the aspect of just cults in general, and emphasize once again the fact that we as Christians need to be careful when we are dealing with people that are caught up in any of these things, that we do not stereotype them. I talked earlier about having compassion for these people, and I believe that it is that compassion in our hearts that will release us in the Holy Spirit to have a heart for them and reach out to them, whether they're caught up in Freemasonry or any of the other cults that we are going to be talking about. When a Jehovah's Witness or a Mormon comes to the door, a lot of Christians will close the blinds and act like nobody's home. But it would be my heart that Christians would become so well equipped in these cults and world religions that as the Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons or the Baha'i or any of these other ones, as we encountered them, that the Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses specifically would have to stop sending people to our doors in the United States because they were getting converted. And it is amazing to think that we can actually plant a seed in somebody's life. But I was sharing during the break with one of the individuals that it's the testimony of Walter Martin, that at his funeral there showed up a man who had been a Jehovah's Witness 25 years prior to that. And although Martin didn't realize it, his words, just a short paragraph spoken to this man who was a Jehovah's Witness 25 years before that, had been a seed that was planted in this guy's life. And he could not get away from what Martin had said. He'd simply planted a seed. And it kept working at him and growing in his life until he gave his life to Jesus Christ. And although Walter Martin didn't realize that he had planted a seed in this guy's life, this guy showed up to his funeral to be a testimony of the power of simply speaking the truth into a situation. And you might not think that your testimony means anything, but I'll tell you what, if you speak your testimony in truth and faith, whether it's short or long, it can have an impact in people's lives. And you will show them that by faith you believe what you believe. You might not have all of the tools, all of the things to be able to answer the questions of the cults. Sometimes you can say, hey, you know what, I'll get back to you on that. I'm going to do some research on that. But you can say, I'm going to pray for you, and this is my testimony. And you can share with them to the best of your ability your testimony, and God will use it and can be a seed planted into their life. I'm not sure if I've mentioned it before, but a statistic was done that in the United States, the average individuals hears the gospel 7.6 times before they come to the Lord. Well, you might only be number 2 in that chain, or number 3, or number 5. But you're planting a seed, or you're watering a seed that somebody else has planted, and it can grow up, and God can bring the increase. So let's be sure to plant those seeds. Okay, let's go ahead and take a break now, and we will come back after the break, talk about Scientology.